Howdy guys, happy Monday. Today, after we went over any questions you may have had about everything that's due tomorrow with the persuasive essays, the argument writing, your 5-paragraph essays, and you got an indicator of everything that's due tomorrow, which I won't rehash right now because I've got enough to get through today with today's post. But it's all down below, just like it always is. Please make sure that you pay attention to everything that's due tomorrow so you can get a great grade. Really quickly, I do want to congratulate you guys. As a whole, the number of failures from quarter 2 to 5-week in quarter 3 cut in half. I'm so proud of you guys. Most of you are turning around. Those of you who aren't, you're starting to get left in the dust a little bit. Time to wake up, shape up, and move forward. Okay? Now, today, we're starting our last mini unit before we really start taking a look at test-taking strategies for our ELA assessment and a little bit more of the review. But we've spent the whole year talking about writing and reading. And I don't just mean writing and reading. I mean writing and reading, where you're actually focusing on what the task is at hand. And we know from all of our conversations throughout the course of the year that connection is at the center of every time you sit down to write something or every time you sit down to read something. Your ultimate goal is connection. And I re-illustrated everything that we did in the beginning of the year. Remember, addition and multiplication are ways to arrive at the same end, but they're expressed differently. Same thing, reading and writing. Your ultimate goal as a writer is connection. That's first and foremost. Now, your author's purpose is the main idea that is designed to connect with the reader. That's what the author has in mind. They set out with a purpose, and that's to communicate a main idea that a reader can connect to. But they know that in order for that connection to happen, the reader has to understand them. And in order for the reader to understand them, they must follow the writer's process and focus on the 6 traits of quality writing. Because that's the words on the page, right? And that's what the reader actually reads. So these broken arrows, the reader actually reads the process and traits. They attempt to gain an understanding by knowing how that structure works. Now, once they understand the structure, they can actually commit to using all the thinking that they need to make that connection. Now remember, that connection is ultimately going to be the author's purpose and the main idea. But we know that in order to understand the main idea, in order to understand the author's purpose, we have to understand this diagram. This is plot structure, we remember. Okay? Character, plot, conflict, theme. I call them the 4 biggies. They're part of a larger umbrella that we know are the literary elements. Now, these literary elements are very necessary to understand exactly how they work together. That's what makes all of this make sense, right? We know that who we are, character, influences what we do, plot. Now, we know that what we do is going to lead us into certain conflicts and situations that we're going to have to solve, resolve, or overcome. Now, those conflicts, because of the nature of what a conflict is, force us to do something differently in order to solve or resolve that conflict. Remember, all conflicts resolve. Conflict is at the heart of all narrative storytelling because that's what drives the plot, and that's what ultimately has to be resolved if we are going to be able to step back and take a look at things that have come up over and over and over again, which we call themes, which we know can only be analyzed after that conflict has been resolved. Remember, all these places that I've circled, they're all related back to conflict. Life is going along good until, boom, a main conflict is introduced. It builds tension, builds tension, builds tension until the climax, which is ultimately a decision that's made that makes the falling action have to happen the way it does. That's why we call it falling action, not jumping action. Now that conflict ultimately will be resolved. But it's not until we're on the outside, on the other side of that conflict, when it's been resolved, whether it's good or bad, that we can actually step back and take a look at what's kept coming up over and over and over again. And once we do that, we have the opportunity to put it all together, use our thinking, and arrive at the main idea that the author wanted us to get in the first place when they were writing it. Are you starting to see what's going on here? The difference is that now we're attacking informational texts. informational text? Well, in a narrative text, the author wants you to connect with the narrator. The narrator is a character. We connect with people based on our empathy, right? They experience a conflict, because we know at the heart of all this is conflict. They experience a conflict, and we put ourselves, if we're being a good reader, in their shoes. We experience it all along with them, so that ultimately the lesson that the main character, the narrator usually, or the person that the narrator focuses on, when that person changes, if we've done our job, we change as well. And that main idea that was at the core is the author's purpose, is that reason for connection. Now you say, that's great, Mr. Kaz, we've been working on that all year. But how in the world does that apply to informational text? There's not really a story in informational text. It's about information. Oh, sure, sometimes there's a story, but usually it's just a whole bunch of information that we have to put together and get at a main idea. How in the world do we do that? Aha. Here is your aha moment for informational text. If a narrative text is aimed for the author to get your connection with the reader through the narrator, in informational text, the goal is to connect with the reader over the information. Now's where I take you back to second grade. When you were first looking at pieces of writing, and you were trying to figure out, your teacher asked you to identify some things, they asked you to identify the 5 W's and the H. The who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how. Well, yeah, Mr. Kaz, so what? That's second grade. I thought we were older now. We're more mature. We're developing. We are. But now, the way that we access this connection, the way that we find the main idea and author's purpose in informational text to connect to the information is we apply the same learning we've been doing all year with narrative text, where it's really easy to make an emotional connection. And now it's time to make an informational connection. The who? Hey, isn't the who just like character? Hey, isn't the what just like plot? Hey, don't the why and how both have to do with conflict? They absolutely do. They absolutely do. These are all the same type of things. So when we're analyzing a piece of informational text, in order to get the main idea, the author's purpose, to connect with that information, we just use the same type of thinking that we did over here. How did a conflict come in and affect what's going on? Who did it affect? And how did it affect them? How does the outcome, the resolution in all of this, contribute to our understanding of the information that the author, when they were writing it, wanted us to connect to? Author's purpose. Now you say, wait a minute, Mr. Kaz, what about when and where? Aha. This is where a key difference in informational text comes in. The when and where. Remember, when we're telling a story or reading a story, it's actually really easy for us to connect to characters. And so it doesn't matter what setting they're in. We can learn similar lessons because similar people learn similar lessons even in different environments. But now, in informational text, a key difference. When we're trying to paint an exact picture of a piece of information, the where and when is going to determine a lot. It's like if I were writing an informational text on the traditions of people of the Jewish faith. If I'm in America 2014, it's a very different article than if I'm writing about, say, Germany 1943. Big difference, right? The where and when gives us context for the information, for how to understand the who, what, why, and how. I want you to understand that this is all the same thing. I know that some of you want to be like, oh, well, I really like fiction, but I hate nonfiction. I can't get... No, if you know how to read, which is what we spent the whole year doing, this translation of this understanding that you have is going to be how you are found when we're talking about informational text, or really any text. Fiction, nonfiction, poetry, drama, it doesn't matter the genre. If you can understand that it all follows the same structure, and that always we are aiming to understand the author's purpose and the main idea by connecting to what they were actually saying, and realizing that these authors use certain things like main characters or pure information to get their point across, that's when we know exactly what we're dealing with to try to access a main idea. So whereas we would analyze the whole structure to access main idea when we're talking about an extended narrative, when we're talking about a shortened piece, even a shortened narrative, we're looking at a much smaller scope. And so our identification can be as simple as it was in 2nd grade. We just have to know that the thinking behind it is much more complex. Just like the difference between simple multiplication and then multiplying using exponents. Layers and layers and layers are added. I don't want you to think that you have to memorize a whole bunch of different things in ELA. It's all basically the same thinking. Keep that in mind as we begin to explore. We started breaking down this informational text called A Message of Hope using the worksheet that I'll attach to the bottom of this post. But you can use this worksheet. It's a graphic organizer, just like all the graphic organizers we've used all year long, where eventually, when you get used to the thinking that you're doing to break down a piece of text, you won't need the organizer anymore. You'll know exactly what to do with that piece of text without even needing an organizer. More on the organizer tomorrow, more on all this tomorrow. I know I packed a lot into this video. Thank you for sticking around, but if you understand this, again, you are on that route to really being able to pick up anything, read it, and get something out of it. Make that connection, which is ultimately your goal as a reader and the author's goal as a writer. Connection. Have a great day, guys. I will see you tomorrow.